Who were Mr. and Mrs. Hill? Well, we don't actually know who they were, but over the last couple of years I've become very, very fond of them. My name is Angus Trumble. I'm Senior Curator of Paintings and Sculpture here at the Yale Center for British Art, and this is one of my favourite conversation pieces in our collection. What's a conversation piece? Well, a conversation piece is a small-scale group portrait of sitters wearing ordinary day clothes in an interior or sometimes out of doors, engaged in a conversation. Very simple. These pictures came into being because Georgian interiors were getting smaller, more intimate, and large-scale portraits suitable for a big picture gallery were no longer in fashion. Here, Mr. and Mrs. Hill are about to entertain guests to tea, that quintessentially English pastime. And one of the most exciting discoveries for me in this picture was to learn that the little teapot on the table is a Dutch stoneware teapot that was produced in imitation of a Chinese Kangxi prototype. These were exported in large numbers to Europe from China in the 17th and 18th centuries. So this is a very expensive object. And these people are obviously making more and more money. They're on the rise. This is their calling card to the world. And spare and quiet though this painting is, it's full of vivaciousness and life. Look at Mr. Hill's rather self-satisfied expression. We know that the posture that he assumes, this very formal posture, was the posture recommended in etiquette manuals in the 18th century. And so this is very aspirational. This is the way Mr. and Mrs. Hill wanted the world to see them. This scene is taking place in summer. There's no fire in the hearth. Instead, there's a Chinese baluster jar with a little dog finial on top. Empty and quiet this interior may be, but notice how much fine decoration, the overmantel inset in a very elaborate floriate border, the little book left on the mantel, and the one detail that strikes me as particularly exciting was the fact that Mrs. Hill is holding a tiny thread between the index finger and thumb of her left hand. It's almost invisible, but if you look closely you can see it. She's working, and probably the implication is that what she's working on is something rather like the extraordinarily intricate apron and lacework of her sleeves, her own costume. The other thing that's interesting is, and that you wouldn't necessarily see, is that this slight bump in Mr. Hill, if it's not natural, was fashionable. In other words, people who didn't have a tummy, who were wealthy, wore a little pad on their front that filled out their waistcoat. This was a look that was popular, it was fashionable. And it's the origin of the old expression, stuffed shirt. And here, Mr. Hill may well literally have a stuffed shirt. This is what we haven't talked about is the picture as a picture. And I've lived with it for a long time. And what is so fascinating is that the artist has chosen to represent the corner of this room as essentially a very daring void, which is not an easy thing to achieve a pictorial interest with simply an empty wall. But the way he does it is to imply that the light is passing through a set of French windows on the left, illuminating the foreground and casting a shadow into a fascinating shadow into the corner of the room. So it's a lovely conceit. The other thing you need to know is that Arthur Devis, the artist who painted this picture, used little dolls in his studio, dressed in costumes. So most probably the hills sat for him to get the head likeness, but he would have scurried back to his studio and used dolls to finish the composition. And that's another reason why this picture looks unnecessarily stiff. He was literally using little dolls and not living subjects. On the other hand, he was a miniature painter, and so the fine detail, the sheen of the gown, the glimmer on the buttons, the fibres of the lace, these are what gives the image its vitality. So stiff it is, but gleaming with surface detail, life. I'm very, very fond of them, as you can tell.